My name is Alex, and I never imagined I'd find myself in such a mess at the age of 42. Life had always been somewhat predictable. VJ, a steady job as an engineer, a cozy suburban home, and a marriage to my wife Emily that spanned 15 years. Our home in Evergreen Terrace was a quaint little house with a white picket fence, surrounded by friendly neighbors who always greeted us with warm smiles and casual small talk. The kind of place where you felt safe leaving your doors unlocked and letting your kids play outside until the streetlights came on. Emily and I had 2 children, Jake, who was 13 and already showing signs of teenage rebellion, and Lily, a bright-eyed 10-year-old who could light up any room with her infectious laughter. Our lives were a series of routines and rituals: VDJ family dinners, weekend barbecues, and Sunday morning bike rides through the neighborhood park. Our closest neighbors were the Turners, a friendly couple with no kids who often hosted block parties and holiday gatherings. Their house was right next to ours, separated by a neatly trimmed hedge and a narrow garden path. Dan Turner was a jovial man in his late 40s, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. His wife, Nancy, was a quiet woman, often seen tending to her garden or walking their 2 golden retrievers. It was during one of my business trips that the cracks in my seemingly perfect life began to show. As a senior engineer for a tech company, I often traveled to oversee projects and meet with clients. This particular trip was to San Francisco, a week-long stint that involved long hours and late-night meetings. I was used to these trips, and Emily was always supportive, managing the household and the kids while I was away. But something felt different this time. Emily had been distant lately, her usual warmth replaced by an uncharacteristic coldness. She brushed it off as stress from her new part-time job at a local boutique, but a nagging feeling in the back of my mind told me there was more to it. Before I left, I noticed Emily spending more time on her phone, her face lighting up with messages she quickly dismissed when I entered the room. When I asked her about it, she shrugged it off, saying it was just her friends from work. I wanted to believe her, to trust her implicitly as I always had, but the seed of doubt had been planted. My flight to San Francisco was uneventful, but my mind was anything but calm. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. During my trip, I tried to focus on work, burying myself in projects and meetings. Yet every time I returned to my hotel room, the silence was deafening, filled with thoughts of Emily and the uneasy feeling that had taken root in my heart. It was on the 4th night of my trip that everything changed. I was in the middle of a conference call when my phone buzzed with a text message from our neighbor, Dan Turner. "Hey Alex, you got a minute? Need to talk about something important." The message was cryptic, and a sense of dread washed over me as I quickly wrapped up my call and dialed his number. Dan's voice was uncharacteristically serious when he answered. "Alex, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. I've seen Emily and Tom, the guy from the next block over, spending a lot of time together. I didn't think much of it at first, but last night, I saw them coming out of his house late. It just didn't look right." My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process his words. Tom? The guy I barely knew, who had moved into the neighborhood a year ago? My mind raced with questions, but all I could manage was a weak, "Thanks for letting me know, Dan." The rest of my trip was a blur. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't sleep. I needed to get home, to confront Emily and find out the truth. The flight back was agonizingly long, each minute stretching into an eternity. When I finally arrived home, Emily greeted me with a forced smile, her eyes betraying a hint of nervousness. As I hugged her, the familiar warmth of her embrace felt tainted, and I knew I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion any longer. I had to know if my worst fears were true. Returning home from my business trip, I tried to play it cool, masking my inner turmoil with a facade of normalcy. But every time I looked at Emily, every time she smiled at me, I felt a sharp pang of doubt. The smallest gestures, DJ her touch, her laughter, her words VJ felt like puzzles with pieces that didn't quite fit. The next few days were a blur of mundane activities. But beneath the surface, my mind was racing. I couldn't shake Dan's words from my head. Had Emily really been unfaithful? It seemed impossible, but the more I watched her, the more I noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed distracted, her phone always within arm's reach, and her late-night work calls had become more frequent. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, I decided to check her phone. It was something I'd never done before, and my hands trembled with guilt and fear as I picked it up. I felt like an intruder in my own home, but I needed answers. The phone was locked, and I knew the passcode at Vij it was our anniversary. I punched in the numbers, and the screen unlocked with a soft click. I quickly navigated to her messages, my heart pounding in my chest. Most of the conversations were innocuous, chats with friends and family. But then I saw a thread with Tom. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen before I finally opened it. The messages were initially harmless, discussions about neighborhood events and casual jokes, but as I scrolled further, they took on a more intimate tone. There were inside jokes I didn't understand, late-night messages filled with emojis, and then, finally, messages that made my blood run cold. "Last night was amazing," read one. "Can't wait to see you again," read another. My mind went blank as I read the words, unable to comprehend the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and tried to act normal when Emily came out of the shower. My mind was spinning with the implications of what I'd seen, but I needed more proof. Confronting her now, with only these messages, might lead to her denying everything. I needed to know the full extent of what was happening. The next morning, I decided to take a day off work. Emily seemed surprised, but didn't question it much. I told her I wanted to spend some time with the kids and get some
things done around the house. In reality, I planned to keep an eye on her, to see if she would meet Tom again. Emily left for work as usual, giving me a kiss on the cheek that felt both familiar and alien. Once she was gone, I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. I parked a few blocks away from Tom's house, where I could watch without being seen. It felt wrong, like I was some sort of detective in a noir film, but I had to know the truth. I didn't have to wait long. About an hour after leaving, Emily's car pulled up in front of Tom's house. She got out, looked around nervously, and then went inside. My heart sank as I watched the scene unfold. It was one thing to suspect, but seeing it with my own eyes was a punch to the gut. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the betrayal. When Emily finally emerged, she looked flustered. She got into her car and drove off. I followed her at a distance, ensuring she didn't see me. She went to her job at the boutique as if nothing had happened. I drove back home feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. How could she do this to our family?
The rest of the day was a struggle to maintain composure. I picked up the kids from school, helped them with their homework, and tried to act like everything was normal. But inside, I was seething. I felt like my world was crumbling, and I didn't know how to stop it. That night, as we sat down for dinner, I couldn't help but watch Emily closely. She chatted with the kids, laughed at their stories, and looked every bit the loving wife and mother. But I knew now it was all a lie. Every smile, every touch, every word VDJ, it was all part of a facade she had built to hide her betrayal. I went to bed early, claiming I had a headache. Lying in the darkness, I replayed the events of the day over and over in my mind. I needed to confront her, to make her explain why she had done this, but I also needed to be smart about it. If I rushed in, fueled by anger and hurt, I might not get the answers I needed. I decided to wait, to gather more evidence, and to confront her when I was ready. The next few days were torture. I pretended everything was normal, but every interaction with Emily was tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. I watched her closely, looking for any signs that might give me more information. She was good, though. If I hadn't known what to look for, I might have missed the little things VDJ, the way she glanced at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the quick texts she sent when she was in another room. One evening, while Emily was out with friends, I decided to check her laptop. She rarely used it, preferring her phone for most things, but I hoped to find something VDDJ, anything VDJ, that would give me more insight into her affair. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Hidden in a folder labeled Work Documents were pictures of Emily and Tom together, messages exchanged through email, and even plans for future meetings. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no denying it now. VDJ Emily was having an affair with Tom. I printed out everything, making copies to ensure I had proof no matter what happened. As I stared at the pile of papers, my hands trembling, I knew it was time to confront her. Armed with undeniable proof of Emily's affair, I felt a mix of dread and resolve. Confronting her would shatter the illusion of our life together, but I needed the truth. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything but the upcoming confrontation. Every minute felt like an hour, the tension in our home almost unbearable. Emily left for work, her demeanor as cheerful as ever. As soon as she was gone, I gathered the evidence I'd printed out and tucked it into a folder. I called into work, claiming I was unwell, and waited for her to return. The hours dragged on, each tick of the clock echoing in the silence of our home. When Emily finally walked through the door that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked surprised to see me, her smile faltering slightly. "Alex, are you okay? You didn't go to work today?" "No, I didn't," I replied, my voice calm but cold. "We need to talk." Her eyes widened slightly, and she glanced around nervously. "What about?" "About this," I said, placing the folder on the table and sliding it towards her. She hesitated before picking it up, her hands shaking slightly as she opened it. I watched her face as she flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to horror. "Alex, she started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said sharply. "Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at me, the folder slipping from her hands onto the table. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant for this to happen." "How long, Emily?" I repeated, my patience wearing thin. She took a deep breath, wiping her eyes. "About 6 months," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It started when you were on one of your business trips. I was lonely, and Tom, he was there for me." "Lies," I said, my voice rising. "You think I haven't been lonely? You think I haven't missed you? But I never once thought about betraying you like this." Emily's face crumpled as she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt so alone. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel a fraction of the pain she had caused me. But instead, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. So what now? Are you leaving me for him?" "No," she cried, shaking her head vigorously. "I don't want to leave you. I love you, Alex. I made a terrible mistake, and I want to fix it. Please, give me a chance to make things right." I stared at her, my heart aching. Could I ever trust her again? Could I forgive her for this betrayal? The anger and hurt were overwhelming, but beneath it all, there was still a part of me that loved her, that wanted to believe we could salvage something from the wreckage of our marriage. "Why should I believe anything you say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You lied to me for months. You betrayed our family." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched mine. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said softly, "but I'm begging you to give me a chance. I'll do anything to prove to you that I can be the wife you deserve." I pulled my hand away, unable to bear her touch. "We'll see," I said, my voice hollow. "But this isn't going to be easy, Emily. Trust is earned, and right now you have none of mine." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. The days that followed were a test of my resolve. Emily tried everything to prove her sincerity, JJ cooking my favorite meals, planning family outings, showering me with affection. But every gesture felt hollow, every smile forced. I couldn't shake the images of her and Tom, the messages that proved just how deep her betrayal ran. I decided to take some time off work to clear my head. I needed space to think, to figure out if there was any way forward. I spent my days at the park, watching the kids play, trying to remember what it felt like to be happy and carefree. But the weight of Emily's infidelity hung over me like a dark cloud, casting a shadow on everything. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench, I noticed Dan Turner walking his dogs. He spotted me and walked over, a concerned look on his face. "Hey, Alex," he said, sitting down beside me. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged, not trusting myself to speak. The sympathy in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "Emily told me what happened," he said quietly. "I'm really sorry, man. If there's anything I can do." "Thanks, Dan," I said, my voice hoarse. "I appreciate it." We sat in silence for a while, watching the dogs play. Finally, Dan spoke again. "Have you thought about counseling? Sometimes it helps to have someone neutral to talk to." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've thought about it. I just don't know if it can fix this." "It's worth a try," he said gently. "You deserve to be happy, Alex. Whether that's with Emily or on your own, you need to find a way to move forward." His words hit me hard, but they also gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way to get through this, to find some semblance of peace. I decided then and there to give counseling a try, to see if there was any way to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. When I got home that evening, I told Emily about my decision. She looked relieved, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Thank you, Alex," she said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The next few weeks were a blur of therapy sessions and difficult conversations. We talked about everything: DJ, the loneliness, the betrayal, the pain. Emily was brutally honest, admitting her mistakes and expressing her remorse. It was excruciating, but it was also cathartic. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with, hidden beneath the layers of guilt and regret. But trust is not something that can be rebuilt overnight. Every day was a struggle, a battle to overcome the doubts and fears that haunted me. There were moments of hope, but they were always followed by moments of despair. I couldn't help but wonder if we were fighting a losing battle, if the damage was simply too great to repair. One evening, after a particularly intense therapy session, Emily and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The silence between us was heavy, but it was also comfortable, a sign that we were making progress, however slow. "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way we were?" Emily asked quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. I sighed, looking out at the fading light. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think we owe it to ourselves to try." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I love you, Alex," she said softly. "I never stopped loving you." "I love you too," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. "But it's going to take time, Emily. A lot of time." As we sat there, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear over the horizon, I felt a flicker of hope. It was fragile, easily extinguished, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Emily and I continued our therapy sessions, each one peeling back another layer of our fractured relationship. We were trying to rebuild, but every step forward seemed to be accompanied by 2 steps back. The trust that had once been the bedrock of our marriage was now a fragile thing, easily shattered by a careless word or an unguarded look. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the kids upstairs doing their homework, I decided it was time to confront the elephant in the room. I'd been holding back, trying to focus on moving forward, but the nagging questions about Tom wouldn't leave me alone. I needed to know the full extent of their relationship. I needed to hear it from Emily, to understand what had driven her to betray me. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but low, "we need to talk about Tom." She stiffened, her eyes darting away. "What about him?" she asked, her tone defensive. "Everything," I replied, leaning forward. "I need to know everything. I can't move on without understanding what happened." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. "Alex, I've told you already. It was a mistake. It started because I was lonely and it just got out of hand." "That's not enough," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I need details, Emily. I need to know how often you saw him, what you talked about, what you did together. I need to know why you chose him over us." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked at me with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "Do you really want to hear this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said firmly. "I need to hear it all." She nodded, taking another deep breath before she began. "It started about 6 months ago, like I said. You were away on one of your trips, and I was feeling, I don't know, lonely, neglected. Tom was just a friend at first. We talked about the neighborhood, about work, but then it became more personal. We started texting late at night, sharing things that I should have been sharing with you. I felt a pang of guilt at her words, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about me right now. "Go on," I said. We started meeting up, first for coffee, then for lunch. It felt exciting, like a secret that was just ours. And then, one night, he invited me over to his place. I knew it was wrong, Alex, but I went anyway. One thing led to another and, well, you know the rest. "How often?" I asked, my voice shaking. "A few times a week," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. But it wasn't just about the physical stuff. It was the attention, the feeling of being wanted, of being seen. "Did you ever think about us? About what this would do to our family?" I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Of course I did, she sobbed. Every single time. But I was in too deep, and I didn't know how to stop. I was scared of losing you, of losing everything. You should have come to me, I said, my voice breaking. You should have told me how you were feeling. We could have worked through it together. I know, she whispered. I know that now. But at the time I felt so disconnected from you, from our life. I made a horrible mistake and I hate myself for it. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of her confession hanging heavily in the air. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew the full extent of her betrayal. Is it over? I asked finally. Are you still in contact with him? No, she said quickly. I ended it as soon as you found out. I haven't spoken to him since. Good, I said, feeling a flicker of hope. Because if we're going to have any chance of fixing this, he needs to be out of our lives completely. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand, and I promise, Alex, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. We spent the rest of the evening talking, airing out our grievances and fears. It was painful, but it was also necessary. For the first time in months, I felt like we were truly communicating, like we were on the same page. The following days were filled with more difficult conversations, but each one brought us a little closer. Emily was committed to earning back my trust, and I was determined to give her the chance to do so. We continued our therapy sessions, delving deeper into the issues that had led us to this point. It was hard, grueling work, but it was also the only way forward. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt a sense of tentative peace. We had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were heading in the right direction. Do you think we can really make this work? Emily asked softly, her hand resting on mine. I don't know, I replied honestly, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try. She smiled, a small, hopeful smile. I love you, Alex. I love you too, I said, squeezing her hand. But this is going to take time, Emily. A lot of time. As we sat there, the last rays of sunlight fading into the night, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was fragile, easily extinguished, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. The decision to rebuild our marriage was not made lightly. Every step forward was a struggle, a test of our resolve. But amidst the attempts to heal, an idea began to form in the back of my mind, VDJ, a dark, insidious thought that refused to be ignored. Revenge. I knew it wasn't the healthy path to take, but the more I thought about Tom, the more I felt the need to make him pay for what he had done to my family. I didn't act on it immediately. For weeks, I buried the urge, focusing instead on therapy and our family. Emily and I worked hard to repair the damage, but trust was slow to rebuild. Every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but picture her with Tom, their secret meetings, their whispered conversations. The anger simmered beneath the surface, and I knew I needed an outlet. One evening, after another exhausting therapy session, I found myself alone in the living room. Emily had gone to bed early, and the house was silent. I sat there, the darkness closing in around me, and I knew I couldn't ignore the urge any longer. I needed to take action, to regain a sense of control over my life. I started by gathering information. Over the next few days, I discreetly collected details about Tom VDJ, his routines, his social media profiles, his friends. I wanted to understand everything about him, to find his vulnerabilities. It was surprisingly easy. Tom was careless, his online presence a goldmine of personal information. He posted frequently about his life, his job, and his hobbies, providing me with a roadmap of his daily activities. My plan began to take shape. I didn't want to hurt him physically, VJ, that would be too obvious. Too risky. Instead, I aimed to dismantle his life piece by piece. I wanted him to feel the same sense of loss and betrayal that I did. It was a cold, calculated approach, and the more I thought about it, the more determined I became. The first step was to undermine his reputation. I created a fake email account and started sending anonymous tips to his employer, suggesting that Tom was involved in unethical activities. I fabricated stories of embezzlement and inappropriate behavior, attaching screenshots of his social media posts as evidence. It was a slow process, planting seeds of doubt that I hoped would grow into full-blown suspicion. Next, I turned my attention to his personal life. Through his posts, I discovered that he was dating a woman named Jessica. She seemed oblivious to his affair with Emily, her comments and photos painting a picture of a happy, committed relationship. I reached out to her from another fake account, posing as a concerned friend. I sent her screenshots of the messages between Tom and Emily, along with photos of them together. I wrote a heartfelt message, expressing my sorrow for her situation and urging her to confront Tom about his infidelity. The fallout was immediate. Jessica's social media went dark, and Tom's posts became less frequent, more erratic. It was clear that my messages had reached her, and the cracks in Tom's life were beginning to show. I felt a grim satisfaction watching his world unravel, knowing that I was the one pulling the strings. But it wasn't enough. The anger still burned within me, and I knew I needed to do more. I turned my attention to his finances, using the information I had gathered to find vulnerabilities in his accounts. It took time and patience, but I eventually found a way to siphon small amounts of money from his accounts into an anonymous one I had set up. It wasn't a lot, just enough to cause him stress and confusion. With each step, I felt a sense of power returning. I was no longer the victim, passively suffering through my wife's betrayal. I was taking control, exacting my revenge in a way that was both subtle and devastating. One day, as I was executing the final phase of my plan, Emily came into the room. She looked at me, a mixture of concern and curiosity in her eyes. "What are you doing, Alex?" she asked softly. "Just some work," I replied, not meeting her gaze. She nodded, but I could tell she was suspicious. "You've been distant lately. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "It's just a lot to process," I said truthfully. "I'm trying to make sense of everything." She came closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know it's hard," she said gently, "but I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only fueled my determination. I nodded, giving her a small smile. "I know," I said, "and I appreciate it." That night, as Emily slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The revenge I was exacting on Tom felt both satisfying and hollow. It didn't change what had happened, didn't erase the betrayal, but it gave me a sense of purpose, a way to channel my anger and pain. The final blow came a week later. I had managed to gather enough evidence to implicate Tom in a series of minor crimes VJJ nothing that would land him in jail, but enough to cause serious trouble. I sent the information to his employer, his friends, and the local authorities, ensuring that his reputation would be thoroughly tarnished. The fallout was swift and brutal. Tom lost his job, his relationship with Jessica ended, and his social circle turned against him. I watched from a distance as his life fell apart, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. I had achieved my goal, but at what cost? As the days passed, I found myself feeling empty. The revenge had consumed me, and now that it was over, I was left with the same broken marriage and the same unresolved pain. Emily and I continued our therapy, but the shadow of my actions loomed over me, a constant reminder of the darkness I had embraced. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Alex, I know you've been struggling," she said softly. "I know this has been incredibly hard for you, but I need to know if we're going to make it. I need to know if you can forgive me." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger, hurt, love, and despair all battled for dominance. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can ever truly forgive you." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I understand," she whispered. "But I love you, Alex. I want to make this work, no matter how long it takes." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my choices pressing down on me. Revenge had given me a temporary sense of power, but it hadn't healed the wounds. If anything, it had only deepened the divide between us. "Let's keep trying," I said finally, my voice heavy with resignation. "But it's going to take a lot of time." Emily reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with hope. "I promise. I'll do everything I can to make things right." As we sat there, holding hands in the quiet of our living room, I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Revenge had been a detour, a dark path that had led me further from healing. But now perhaps we could find a way back to each other, one step at a time. The months following my quest for revenge were some of the hardest I had ever faced. Emily and I continued our therapy sessions, each one peeling back the layers of hurt and mistrust that had built up between us. It was a slow, painful process, but there were moments of genuine connection that gave me hope. Our relationship was fragile, like a sapling pushing its way through the ashes of a forest fire. But it was growing. One evening, after a particularly intense session, our therapist suggested we take a break from the heavy conversations and spend some time focusing on the positive aspects of our relationship. "Remember why you fell in love," she said. "Rediscover what brought you together in the first place." We decided to follow her advice. That weekend we planned a family trip to the beach, a place we had loved visiting before everything fell apart. The kids were thrilled, their excitement infectious. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of anticipation, a small spark of hope. The drive to the beach was filled with laughter and music. Jake and Lily chattered excitedly in the back seat, their faces pressed against the windows as we approached the coastline. Emily and I exchanged smiles, the tension between us easing slightly in the warmth of the sun and the sound of the waves. We spent the day building sandcastles, collecting seashells, and splashing in the surf. For a few precious hours, the past seemed to fade away, replaced by the simple joy of being together as a family. Emily and I took long walks along the shore, our hands brushing occasionally, a tentative connection slowly rebuilding. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, we sat around a bonfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The kids' laughter filled the air, and I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Emily's eyes met mine across the fire, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with. "Thank you for this," she whispered later that night as we sat on the porch of our beach rental, the sound of the waves soothing and calming. "I know things are still hard, but today it was perfect." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. It was, I agreed. But we still have a long way to go. "I know," she said softly, "but I believe we can do it. I believe we can find our way back to each other." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild our relationship. We found new ways to connect, to communicate, and to support each other. The anger and hurt didn't disappear overnight, but they started to lessen, replaced by a cautious optimism. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a small, hopeful smile. "Do you remember our first date?" she asked. I laughed, the memory flooding back. "How could I forget? You spilled coffee all over me and I still asked you out again." She chuckled, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "I was so nervous. I thought I'd blown my chance with you. And yet here we are," I said, reaching for her hand. "We've been through so much, Emily, but I think we're finally starting to find our way again." She squeezed my hand, her expression earnest. "I know I've hurt you, Alex, and I know it will take time to rebuild what we've lost, but I'm committed to us, to our family. I love you." "I love you too," I said, feeling a surge of emotion, "and I'm willing to keep trying, to keep fighting for us." As we sat there, hand in hand, watching the last rays of sunlight fade into the night, I felt a sense of hope for the future. We had been through hell and back, but we were still standing, still fighting, and maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. The following year was one of growth and rediscovery. Emily and I continued our therapy, but we also focused on building new memories, creating new traditions, and finding joy in the small moments. We went on family trips, hosted game nights, and spent quiet evenings talking about our dreams and fears. One sunny afternoon, as we were working in the garden, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," she said, "about us, about our future." I looked up, curious. "What about it?" "I want to renew our vows," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "I want to reaffirm our commitment to each other, to our family. I want to start fresh." Her words took me by surprise, but as I looked into her eyes, I saw the sincerity and hope there. "I'd like that," I said, a smile spreading across my face. I'd like that a lot. We spent the next few months planning the ceremony, involving the kids in every step. They were excited, thrilled at the prospect of seeing their parents reaffirm their love. It was a small, intimate gathering, held in our backyard under the blooming cherry blossom tree. Our closest friends and family joined us, their smiles and support a reminder of the community that had helped us through the darkest times. As I stood there, holding Emily's hands and looking into her eyes, I felt a sense of peace and gratitude. We had been through so much, but we had come out the other side stronger, more committed to each other than ever before. I vow to love you, to support you, and to stand by you through every challenge, I said, my voice steady and clear. I vow to rebuild the trust we've lost and to cherish every moment we have together. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she repeated her vows, her voice trembling with emotion. I vow to love you, to honor you, and to work every day to earn back your trust. I vow to be the partner you deserve and to cherish our family above all else. As we exchanged rings and sealed our vows with a kiss, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was our new beginning, a chance to rebuild and renew our love. It wouldn't be easy, and there would still be challenges ahead, but I knew we were ready to face them together. The months that followed were filled with hope and healing. We continued to work on our relationship, but we also found joy in the everyday moments, VGJ cooking dinner together, helping the kids with their homework, taking long walks in the evening. Our love was different now, forged in the fire of betrayal and rebuilt with determination and trust. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to Emily and smiled. I think we're going to be okay, I said softly. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her smile reflecting the warmth in her eyes. I think so too, she whispered. I love you, Alex. I love you too, I replied, feeling a deep sense of contentment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over our home, I knew that this was our new beginning. A chance to rewrite our story, to build a future filled with love, trust, and happiness. And with Emily by my side, I was ready to embrace it all.